vogliono la velocità, non vogliono la qualità.
Oh, latitude! I saw it, yes! How was it? Oh my god, your hair is great. I love it.
It's going to be a last minute decision. How are you doing? How's tennis going? Yeah? You're following it or
Okay, so questo maybe. It's a button somewhere. Is it this?
That's what I'm trying to work out now.
I have to ask the phone. Can you ask? If it will be intro and then intro. Walk of two figures. Right, so what is How did you do that? Is it that? It was that little.
Okay, so the first one.
Thank you.
For Claire.
Oh, how sweet. Can you send me afterwards? Because it's too dark.
Too happy in the way. Hello.
Welcome to CYRUS Week. Every year for the last 43 years, we remember. We never forget. Every year, Lobby for Cyprus always takes a Wednesday and has a seminar. And that seminar is on many different topics. And tonight, it's a privilege to have with us TASOULA, a great privilege. She's a sister of ours. Yes, you see how the famous. But I'm not going to go into any detail. I'm going to allow Nick to make all the main introductions. What I'm going to do is just thank all of you that have come here tonight, especially from the Cyprus High Commission. Welcome. The head of the cultural section, Dr. Achilles Hadjigireagou, We have representative from the Federation of Cypriots, Andreas Karaoulis, and we have from political parties, Michalis Gashis from ADEC, and from many refugee associations and friends of Lobby for Cyprus. This year has been a difficult year for us, and the topic tonight is so important, very important. It may not be a political topic, but at the end of the day, it's something that affects politics. I pass on to our former coordinator of Lobby for Cyprus, Nick Gounoukpias, who is a lawyer himself, specialist in intellectual property, but has been involved in cultural heritage for many, many, many years, and has worked with TASOULA and many others. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Theo, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Lobby for Cyprus's annual seminar, which I always call the Kyriago Christodoulou Memorial Seminar, in memory of our friend. The topic this year is one which we covered a little bit 2 or 3 years ago when TASOULA was here before, but it's a much broader theme this year on cultural heritage generally, looking at the Cyprus experience, but also with the distinguished speakers that we have tonight, looking more generally at cultural property and art theft. We have 3 fantastic speakers this evening. In the reverse order from how they're going to speak, on my left, it's Professor Mark Altawil from University College, London. And Mark is a reader in Near East archaeology at University College. He has been involved in a variety of research projects in the Middle East and has experience in investigating looting antiquities from the region. His work includes a social history of the ancient Near East and presenting its importance in shaping world history and culture, and he's been extensively interviewed about recent events in Syria and Iraq. Even though Mark was born in Iraq, we discovered about 10 minutes ago that our DNA profile is almost identical, which either suggests that the Middle East is a big melting pot of different ethnic groups, religions and DNA, or that the people that do the test are complete frauds. I'm not sure which one it is. But thank you very much for coming, Mark. On my right is Dr. Aras Sarafian, who's a historian specialising in late Ottoman and modern Armenian history. He's a director of the Gomidas Institute in London, and in recent years he has worked as an academic activist with Turkish civil society. I'm looking forward to hearing about his experiences in Turkey. He's worked with various organisations there, professional bodies and municipalities, and his aim has been to stop the destruction within Turkey of Turkey's diverse cultural heritage, which obviously involves the preservation of Armenian history and cultural artifacts. And then right next to me is TASOULA. Now, it's difficult for me to describe TASOULA. She's written a book which does a much better job than I would. But my connections with TASOULA began in December 1991, when I was preparing for Christmas. And I was looking forward to Christmas parties, time was off work, thinking about all the presents I hadn't yet bought, what I was going to be doing for Christmas. And then I had a phone call out of the blue from a lawyer in Cyprus that some of you may know, a great friend called Michael Kiprianou. And Michael is a brilliant lawyer, but not a detail man, as I would say. And he also speaks very quickly when he gets excited. And he said to me, Nick, I've got a fantastic new case for you. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, well, it involves an icon, an auction house, it involves art theft, it involves academics who are dodgy and have been paid. His favourite word was vagabond. There's all these vagabonds, and he rattled off a list of names, financiers, Lichter, and I thought, blimey, this is exciting stuff. It sounds like a James Bond novel, I thought, all these different people. And I said to Michael, can you give me a little bit more detail? And he said, no. I said, okay, so what do you expect me to do? And he said, talk to TASOULA HADJITOFI in the Netherlands. She knows it all. So I started talking to TASOULA, and very soon I realised that this really was like a James Bond novel. And if you want to know more about it, it's in her book, Big Bar book. However, what I didn't realise was that James Bond, in this case, was actually a woman. And here she is. So, TASOULA, please round of applause for TASOULA. I understand that there is a video which we're going to see, is that right?
Yeah, let's do the introduction video because it's... First of all, thank you so very much for being here tonight, distinguished guests. I also want to say a special thank you to my friends, Ara, Mark, Nick, for supporting me tonight. I also want to say a special thank you to Scotland Yard, that I've always been working behind the scenes, but tonight 2 members are here, Claire Hutchins, former head of art crime, and her substitute Stuart. So I'm very, very happy to see you here tonight. And you know I'm dedicated with Walk of Truth to work with you for justice from here. And as long as I can breathe, you know I shall do that. And many of you who travel far to be here, and there are a couple of more coming. So it's very difficult to tell one's life in 10 minutes. And tonight we would like to say a few words so that my colleagues also can say something and we can open to discussions. So I will not focus, I shall focus on my personal journey, which is as a refugee, as an immigrant, how I got involved and how it is important to engage cultural heritage among the ordinary citizens. So perhaps if the colleagues up there can play the introduction video, I can start with that.
A helpless child unable to protect the historical monuments, the ancient places of worship I prayed in, the frescoes, mosaics and icons which gave deep meaning to my life. Every artifact has a story to tell. Until we understand what meaning these monuments and artifacts hold for the people who dwell from the same cultural ground, we will never understand the impact of their loss. My personal experience of war and injustice inspired me to dedicate my life to protecting cultural heritage. Walk of Truth campaigns against all threats to the world's cultural heritage posed by violence and crime.
In countries like Mali, Iraq and Syria, precious cultural heritage is being wrecked and exploited by extremists who seem proud of what they are doing.
Walk of Truth organizes global debates to determine ways to combat art trafficking. Walk of Truth rallies leaders and legislators to strengthen the laws around art trafficking and restitution. Walk of Truth engages ordinary citizens and those affected by war about the importance of protecting and preserving cultural heritage. I have traced and repatriated over 5,000 looted artifacts from around the world, and I share the lessons learned with any country whose cultural heritage is at risk. In my memoir, The Icon Hunter, I share the inside story. We can win the battle to protect and preserve the world's cultural heritage if we work together. I'm a negotiator of peace, and I use cultural heritage as my currency.
If I stand, I feel uncomfortable sitting there when I'm speaking to you. So I think that we live in a time where every day we see millions of refugees fleeing from Syria, Iraq, and they are coming to Europe. These people suffered losses of lives, they're traumatized, they have seen their cultural heritage, their sacred sites being blown spectacularly on video. And of course, in times of war, the loss of life is much more of a priority than the loss of cultural heritage, one could argue. But I assure you that when you deliberately destroy the cultural heritage of a country, you destroy the soul of the people, you destroy the trust between the people to live together. And post-war, it is very difficult to build trust when you do disrespect the religious temples or religious antiquities of one another, the graveyards. I think it is very, very difficult to build peace and reconciliation when one does not tolerate the death of the other. It is very difficult to trust and live side by side. Also, historical and cultural sites are not less. Each cultural heritage tells a different story to different people. It holds communities together. It holds memories of people. And when we're affected by war or conflict and we are forced to flee, holding back on those good times and those memories is vital to survival. Now, how does a refugee or an immigrant who comes to West now, tries to integrate, tries to forget their sorrow, feel when they go to a British home or to a Dutch home where I live, trying to live with the laws of the country and be accepted, start anew, and then they see looted antiquities from their country, whether it's Iraq, or Yemen, to be hanging in the house of their guests or as sold on galleries. Well, I can tell you how I felt when I first saw icons, frescoes and mosaics from Cyprus on sale in Holland. However much I tried to be accepted, however much I tried to not to feel guilty for liking Holland and maybe giving up the dream of going back home if I like it too much, I felt insulted. I felt misunderstood. And my sense of belonging was challenged, and I thought, these people just don't understand me. I can never belong here. How can they feel that a piece of a church mosaic or a fresco, which is a passage from the Bible, which I use in order to pray in my religion, how can anyone think that money gives them the right to hang it in their wall as a piece of art? How can I ever be truly Dutch if they don't get it? But of course, people sometimes do things because they do not know or they do not understand. And I must say, in my many years of campaigning, I have met some of the most wonderful people worldwide who have been collectors, or they bought something which was looted unknowingly, and they have given it voluntarily back as soon as they understood the value it holds to individuals like myself and many other people in affected zones of war. So cultural heritage should actually be higher than politics because it belongs to humanity. However, legislation limits us for repatriation to look at the national boundaries of the country, the national legislation, or the international treaties. And I think that we have to think higher, because when you have a war or a conflict, the borders of a country change. So cultural heritage which belongs to you today might belong to you tomorrow, and someone else. So we need to look at cultural heritage to transcend it to another level, and to look at international legislation, and to look at ways where we can give credit to the value that cultural heritage has to other ethnicities. For example, legally, something which is in Bergamo in Germany, originating from Turkey, under international law should go to Turkey. However, how do you exhibit it in a museum or in a public space where you give credit to the ethnic group that it has emotional value to, whether they are Assyrians, whether they are Armenians, whether they are Greeks, Christians, or whatever? I just use that as an example, but I think we have come to the era where cultural heritage has taken a more prominent role, and I think that nowadays there is much more sensitivity about the value it has to ordinary citizens. I can tell you that in my early days as a campaigner and also as an honorary consul, I remember professional career diplomats telling me, TASOULA, we will deal with the missing, the dead, and you deal with the icons. It wasn't priority, and it wasn't just in my country, everywhere else too. That is why law enforcement has such small art crime units, and some police, they don't have any at all. Nowadays, after the events in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Mali, things have changed. We see prosecution at the International Criminal Court in Mali for destruction in Timbuktu. We see, for example, that there is interest in the EU to harmonize the legislation in this area. And many international treaties, there is lobbying to sign and ratify so that cultural heritage can go back where it came from. Recently, Cyprus was the president of the Council of Europe, and I was delighted to see that they have taken the initiative to make art trafficking on a national level a criminal offence. It was signed by 6 countries. I hope it will be signed by many more, and I hope it will be ratified and implemented, because laws we have. But at the end of the day, we need political will to implement it. And I come down to cultural heritage is normally seen as something for the elite, the intellectuals, and not for the ordinary citizens like you and me. However, there is not enough capacity to protect cultural heritage unless we can convert each and every one to be the eyes and ears of cultural heritage. So we need to engage the public. And in order to engage the public into that role, we first have to acknowledge the value it has. And I'm very happy to have Ara here, who will speak about the role that cultural heritage can play in peace and reconciliation. So I won't go into it myself. Now, how does a woman from Famagusta get to become, as you say, James Bond, which I really am not a James Bond. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I left Cyprus in 1976, and I came to the UK to study, and after 4 years to the Netherlands. And I became an activist about Cyprus and what happened to me. And I was approached by a controversial art dealer who wanted to sell via me to Cyprus the Kanakaria mosaics. Now, I can tell you that when you experience war, you're a changed person. I was 14 when I experienced the bombing in the Turkish invasion in 1974. I cowered in the bathroom with my siblings, and I watched my mum kneeling in front of the icon of Apostolus Andreas with a candle of Easter. We were terrified, and I was silent for many years. I walked next to myself, denying what I saw, denying what I knew. And it was only when I saw these frescoes and mosaics that something inside me woke up. My Pandora box was open, and I thought, oh my God, naive and young as I was, I thought, I lost my home, I lost my youth. But now, if they vanish all the evidence that I was born there, the names of the cities are changed. People will think I'm lying when I say I was once born in Famagusta. I was only 17 and a half those days. So that inspired me to begin my hunt and find out, to stop actually the art dealers. That is how I began. So I found myself working with Interpol, Undercover, with Europol, Scotland Yard, FBI, Cyprus police, German police. And I found myself, with the blessings of the former Archbishop Chrysostomos I, to be surrounded by the best lawyers in the world. My time was volunteer, but I had the best lawyers, including Nick, to give me advice how to get the merits of a case and repatriate them. In 1997, I understood that we had so many civil cases, a lot of money on lawyers, and uncertainty for repatriation of the antiquities. So we thought of doing something else and catching the art dealers on the act. So I colluded with one of the dealers to pretend we would buy everything we could from Aydin Digman. And whilst we were dealing, the Cypriot and German police intervened, and they busted 3 apartments in Munich, and we found 5,500 antiquities hidden in double ceilings, double floors, and everything else. So it was Christmas, I thought, for the Cypriots. However, legislations failed us, and it took 18 years for Cyprus to get back only 200 of these pieces. But that, I looked back and reflected on my experience, and I thought, Cyprus has a lot to offer in the areas of protecting cultural heritage, because in the 40 years of occupation, we have civil cases, criminal cases, a lot of alternative restitution. And if I was to digitize all of this and set up an NGO and inspire, share all this voluntary work with the rest of the world, whether Syria, Iraq, perhaps I can create a network of TASOULAs worldwide, and together we can repatriate antiquities where they come from by acknowledging the value they can play for the people in affected war zones. At the same time, I learned a lot being an honorary consul from the government, lobbying as well as from the lawyers, and I've been campaigning to change legislation, and now Walk of Truth is a very strong body for advocating for changes of laws. Now, I will stop here and then ask please to put the next video, which is 1 minute, about what is in this book, and then I'll read a couple of pages and pass on to the other speakers. That's the beginning of the book, I guess. No.
of trading.
I could not have written this book without Kathy Barrett, my co-writer, a lady in America that I met in Iceland, Reykjavik, in a conference I went, which is called The Spirit of Humanity. And she was so taken by my story and stood by me like a soulmate and made this book a reality. The biggest challenge Kathy and I had, how to explain to non-Christian Orthodox the value that icons or frescoes have to us. And we decided to use the theme of Easter. So the book starts with 2-3 pages describing Easter in Jerusalem, where each year patriarchs and archbishops worldwide, from Russia to Serbia to Armenia, they go to the tomb of Christ to bring the holy light on time for Easter Saturday night in their respective countries. And then I go straight into the dark passages of art trafficking, showing how the shady characters work. And I have 2 flashbacks. One, how I as a child felt during the invasion in Famagusta. And the second flashback is my last Easter in Cyprus, in Famagusta, where my parents drove to Salamis, Apostolos Varnavas, where we took communion on Holy Thursday, and then collected rizaka and things to color the eggs on our way to the village of my beloved parents, Mandres. And then I show the reader how basically religion, culture, and rituals are part of the DNA of each one of us Cypriots. So I will just read a couple of passages and I'll pass on so you see the tone. In a cafe a few minutes walk from Vera's shop, the 2 men sit drinking whiskey. The Cypriot government is going to pay me a huge amount of money to buy back their stolen artifacts, says von Rijn. Really? I'm impressed. How in the world did you manage to strike that deal? One crucial ingredient is missing that you might be able to help me. Please, go on, Virus says. It's my understanding that you have a good working relationship with Aydin Digman. What's your interest in Aydin? Virus asks. He was a major supplier of artifacts coming out of Cyprus after the 74 war, with a free pass in and out of the occupied area, which holds hundreds of ancient churches. Sounds like a Byzantine gold mine. You have no idea, says von Rijn. Why come to me? Asks Virus. Digman and I had a falling out over a client I introduced to him from America. Are you familiar with the Peg Goldberg case, the Kana Korea? I vaguely recall reading something about it in the papers, says Virus. Digman and I sold Goldberg 4 rare mosaics considered to be among the oldest Byzantine Christian antiquities, depicting the Archangel Michael, the upper part of the Christ child, and the apostles Matthew and James. What period? Asks Virus. 6th century mosaics originating from the Kanakaria church, revered by the collectors and worshipped by the Orthodox. They survived the iconoclasts. So, what happened? Goldberg attempted to flip the mosaics to the Getty Museum for millions in profits and got busted. The trial between her and the Church of Cyprus became a huge headache for Digman, and he holds me responsible. What do you propose? Asks Virus. If you know Digman, you know his temperament. He will take his anger for me to the grave. So, you are not on speaking terms? Virus asks. All you have to do is to act as my conduit. If you purchase the artifacts for me, Digman will never know that I'm involved. It's that simple. We'll get rich and the Cypriots will have their artifacts back. Virus asks, what kind of fee are you talking about? for Ryan ignores the question as they continue sizing each other up. CYRUS, we do this deal, and if everything runs smoothly, we go to the next phase. CYRUS is elated. What could be better than a no-risk, quick cash deal and access to client with deep pockets? I appreciate the opportunity, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I will have to think about it, says CYRUS. He's the perfect shield for Ryan because of his long trusted relationship with Dickman. Of course, take all the time you need, CYRUS, but let me be straight with you. I feel like you are the guy. I'm willing to pay you good money. Let's not waste each other's time. You're replaceable, my good man. Don't test me. CYRUS feels the bite. He wants to investigate for Ryan beyond Christian's recommendation. Why would the Cypriot government be buying back their stolen artifacts? CYRUS would have to reach out to a Cypriot, someone connected to the government, who could verify for Ryan's story. The bartender pours another round. To all things old, says CYRUS, raising his glass. The next day, CYRUS reaches for the phone and dials a number in Cyprus. My friend, a quick word. There is a rumor that Michel von Rijn is working with the Cypriots. The flowing lines on CYRUS's face relax as his source in Cyprus reveals the inside information he seeks. I see, says CYRUS. Honorary consul in the Netherlands. A young woman, TASOULA HADJITOFI. Most interesting. So, and this is actually a small passage in the night of the sting in Munich. And believe you me, I am no James Bond, and you'll understand when I read this. That evening, my bodyguard and I sit with our backs facing von Ryan's table in the Hilton hotel bar. For Ryan, CYRUS, Rossi and Laszlo are drinking heavily and talking about the lavish lunch they will have the following day at my expense. For Ryan is being the big man, cursing up a storm as he shares his adventures. Remember, he says to them, Eftis expects to be given a list of preferred items, and he will tell you what he wants to buy. Eftis wants mosaics, frescoes, icons, Bibles, and crosses. He will buy anything originating from Cyprus, and he has very deep pockets. We are all going to make a bloody fortune because of this guy, says von Rijn. The men raise their glasses to him, and they all drink. CYRUS asks, von Rijn, are you alone here in Germany, or do you have a hen in your nest? Von Rijn is only just out of rehabilitation, and he's right back to his old ways. Von Rijn makes a final toast with the boys. Let's nail this tomorrow. Cheers to Eftis, he says, as they raise their glasses one last time. Helmut escorts me to my hotel room. No need to worry. We have eyes on you. Sleep well. Once inside my room, I wonder if having eyes on you means that the police have cameras in my room. I step into the shower and push the curtain close to ensure privacy when changing into my pajamas as my paranoia peaks. Checking my reflection in the mirror afterwards, I notice a rash on the surface of my neck, a pale pallor, and heavy bags forming under my eyes. My nervous energy burns more fuel than I can consume in food, and my gaunt appearance is reflective of the hunger I feel for this ordeal to be over. I slide into bed and pull the covers over my head, but the sound of my anxious heartbeat prevents me from sleeping. Alone with my fears and anxieties, I remind myself about what I'm fighting for, as my thoughts drift back to my life in Cyprus before the war in Famagusta. So, this book I would like to sell to as many people worldwide as possible. Not to be rich, because every penny of it will go to Walk of Truth. I have been a volunteer for Cyprus all my life, and my lessons learned will be my gift to the 65 million refugees worldwide and any profits will go to Walk of Truth. So thank you very much, and I hope to convert each and every one of you to eyes and ears of culture and make you cultural crime watchers and volunteers for Walk of Truth.
Thank you very much, TASOULA. That was absolutely fascinating and moving, and I really do recommend the book as well. I saw it at different stages of its development, and it is a fascinating book, and I don't care what you say, I think of you as James Bond.
On the hills.
On the hills. Our next speaker, who I'm really looking forward to hearing from, is Dr. Aras Sarafian. I'm just absolutely fascinated to hear of his experiences in Turkey, discussing some of these issues with them. Ara, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, the organizer. Thank you, TASOULA. We have a very similar path in terms of how we began our work with the issues we're discussing today. I'm originally from Kyrenia. I'm a refugee. Fortunately, we were spared the agony of being in Cyprus 74. We were here on holiday, and we just stayed. We watched it on television. And that was a traumatic experience for me too. I was very angry for many, many years. I tell people I hated Turks. That's the way I would have expressed it. I was 13 at the time, for many years, and I decided to learn Turkish and to get to the bottom of this whole Cyprus thing in the name of, I guess, justice. And I made my first trip to Turkey in 1981. Most of it didn't go to eastern provinces. I went to historic Armenia, and I was very, 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 very confused because I could not identify the landscape. I couldn't identify the places. I thought I would feel a connection. And that feeling stayed with me, but I still continued the idea of learning Turkish. And in 1985, I went to Ankara to learn Turkish. Initially, I was given a scholarship by the Turkish government, which was withdrawn, so that only piqued my interest. Why would they do that? And while I was there learning Turkish, and I started to teach English to people my own age, get a very formative experience, I visited Kyrenia. At that, in 1985, it wasn't possible for Cypriots to go there. I was born in Bendaya, but it didn't say Bendaya, Cyprus, in my passport, so I thought I'd risk it. And I went from Turkey, from Mersin. I had some problems at the port, but they let me in. And I went to Kyrenia, and I thought to myself, you know, if my child one day came here, he would not believe that Kyrenia was a Greek city. You know, Geshtas's shop here, and you know, Neoclides and so forth. You know, Bedadaktilos and Beshparmak. And you realize how much the landscape, there was a beautiful fountain that was donated to the people of Kyrenia by a friend of our family, by a Jewish friend of the family, Mr. Cohen. And they had taken that off, the plaque off, they had put Kemal Atatürk's bust in the middle of it. And you realize how the landscape was laughing at me. I said, if I did not know, if I was not from Kyrenia, I would have been fooled. I would have thought this was a Turkish city. And that got me interested as a historian into the written records. And that's what made me into a historian. I decided to graduate school because this is the only way. You can't destroy the written records, but you can change the landscape, especially if it's a state doing so. The other part of the experience was that, but because I lived in Turkey and I was teaching young Turkish students my age, I was about 24 at the time, I realized that, you know, not all Turks are bad, and I realized how much we have in common. I mean, the whole idea that we're very different, Turks and Kurds or Armenians, we're so different. You realize that we're not that different. We have so much in common, and we understand so much more. That I had a more serious approach to the whole issue of its Turkish, Armenian, Kurdish, and of course Cypriot matters. I did not engage the Cyprus issue because I was hurt by it, and I did not have that distance that I need. I've stayed away from the Cyprus issue all my life, but I continued with on the Armenian. And as I went into academia, you realize that the Turkish state's violence is not sort of thing that you see what they allow to happen, but Turkey, having destroyed people and the culture, the state also writes history or rewrites history. It writes people out of history. And as a graduate student at Michigan University, I had to deal with this denialist historiography, which I find fascinating because a whole state is geared to deny history, to write people out. Anatolia was a land that was bereft of real people until the Turks, supposedly, Central Asians came and they sort of populated the place. They sort of jump over the Roman and Byzantine. The Greeks were never Greeks. The Greeks are of course, Romans, right? Rum. This distinction between the Rums and the Yunans. And you say, what language do they speak? Well, the Rums speak Rumja, and the Yunans speak Yunanja. I say, so what language do they speak in Cyprus? They say Rumja. Isn't that same as Yunanja in Greece? They say, oh no, they're different. I mean, the degree to which they themselves start believing these false distinctions. So that's what drew me into history and historiography. But now I was more and more learned. I learned Ottoman. I started working in Turkish archives and discerning within Turkish society different elements. By the early 2000s, Turkey was already changing. There were new openings. And I started being an outspoken critique of Turkish historiography inside of Turkey, dealing with the genocide issue and pushing the boundaries. I was doing the walk of truth, as it were, inside of Turkey, within specific Turkish circles. And I was surprised that there are wide ranges of groups of people who are supportive, who want to know, because they also don't believe their own state. So this was the first fertile ground. And we even published books in Turkish, disseminated them. We saw opportunity in doing in actually engaging Turkish society. And soon enough, with the Kurdish movement, we got invitation, I as a historian, to come to southeastern Turkey, where now you realize that people, practically everyone, do not deny, that people are quite aware that Turkish historiography, Turkish identity is based on false premises, especially the Kurds, because they themselves are also victim of this. And now they were controlling municipalities, the towns with a million population, and we started working in this circle. We saw the possibility of re-engaging Turkish society, having a voice within Turkey itself, and beginning to push back from these particular places. Who were our supporters? Other than Kurdish intellectuals, human rights organizations, Turkish bar associations, Turkish and Kurdish teachers, and trade unionists. And we realize that we are not powerless. It's a question of how far are we willing to take the burden of making our case in Turkey, sometimes dealing with the indignity of that burden. But it's a fertile field. And I had my sort of funny moments, talk with cultural artifacts. I once went to the museum in Erzurum, the capital of ancient Armenia, where the museum makes no mention of Armenians, as if there's a huge gap. It's Romans and Byzantines and then the Turks. And there was an exhibit, Armenians as troublemakers, people who murdered Turks in 1915. So out of the blue, they came out and murdered Turks. So I decided to talk to the director. I said, and she accepted me. I went upstairs, and I said, I come from London. At the British Museum, we have a very beautiful bust of the goddess Anahit, Aphrodite in Greek. It's the Armenian goddess Anahit that was excavated here, and the British bought it in the 1870s. So how come in all these years you haven't found a single Armenian artifact in your museum? And she said, yes, we're aware of the Anahit in the British Museum. Yes, that's very curious, isn't it? She was laughing at me. Because we all know what the score is, but the Turkish state has a sense that it's controlling all the cards and they can do what we want. Of course, that's wrong, because in subsequent years we've been building our own agenda, our own presence, with the help of Turkish civil society organizations, and raising questions that were not raised before. And in the process, of course, we're also learning about ourselves. Often I find that our own separation between Turks and Kurds, Muslims and Christians are often artificial. There's a lot of overlap. I use architecture. I find it absolutely fascinating, because we think of Armenian art, Armenian architecture as being this solid, homogeneous entity. Then you realize that actually Armenian architecture is not so homogeneous. It's shared with other people, including Turks. That Armenian architecture is often regional. So if you look at Armenian churches in Kayseri area, it's like Greek churches. If you look in Diyarbakir area, it's like mosques, and Chaldean churches, Assyrian churches. So it's actually very interesting, because many of these divisions, many of the distinctions are artificial, and we have much more in common. I'd like to see that done in Cyprus. I'm sure, other than Halloumi, I'm sure we have a lot more in common with Turkish Cypriots that we don't even realize. And this has been the work that we've been doing. At the last event, until 2015, this was very possible, because Turkey was on the road of democratization. there was freedom of thought and expression. We had a big Armenian genocide commemoration in Diyarbakir 2015. I was one of the speakers. I looked on the platform, and the people who were there, the Kurdish people who were there, they represented millions of people. You realize that within Turkey is not homogeneous. Turkey appears powerful from the outside, but often that's their weakness. They appear powerful, but they're actually not. There are cleavages within Turkish society. I don't say that in a negative way, because they also want to be democratic. They don't want to carry the Turkish nationalist the baggage on their back. And our biggest supporters are now Turks and Kurds. Many of them are now learning Armenian and becoming historians in their own way. If I may, I'd like to show some pictures of some of the issues that I will talk about. Can we show some on the slides, please? And I'll talk to them very quickly. Starting from the first one. That's not the first one. And further back. Further back. No, this is. I think this is the last one actually. So you have to go to the beginning. Number 22. Can you go to number 1, please? You can see the numbers at the top.
1 second.
So these are photographs that I've taken over time. I took decided to present architectural images because they show different facets of how Armenian history is dealt with, the material history, how it's turned on its side, and of course it's destroyed as well. I'm not sure why.
That's the first one.
That's not the first one. The first one is Akhtamar. At the top there should be the numbers of the slide.
It's set in a loop. I can't.
All right, let's.
Only 1 second.
Okay, that's fine. I started with the most unlikely. I'm sorry, I'm in your way. I started with the most unlikely image. This is an Armenian monastery in eastern Turkey, the only one that the state has actually rebuilt as part of a PR agenda in the 2000s. Now, many Armenians rejected this Akhtamar from the 9th, 10th centuries as saying this is a fig leaf about what the Turks are doing, the Turkish state is doing in terms of destroying monuments and Armenian architectural heritage. But from my perspective, it's the beginning of engaging these issues within Turkey. There's a cross on it that took a long while for it to appear there, but this has been there, since early 2008, 2009. It's a museum by the state, and they allow church service to take place once a year. Can you go next one, because we're quite a lot very, very quickly. The church is, of course, on an island. The damga, the note of the state is always there. The Turkish flag is very, very prominent. And when you go to this church, although it's an Armenian church with Armenian writing, nowhere does it say this is an Armenian church. So this is the church of Surkhaj on Akhtamar. It's on Akhtamar. They've Turkified the name. It's a King Gagik I built it. Who is King Gagik I? The fact he's an Armenian king or the Armenians were there is not mentioned. This shows us some of the tensions within Turkish, the Turkish camp, how to engage this, and the embarrassment of it all. Next one, please. But what's interesting is that lots of Turks and lots of Kurds go to the island. Behind you is the explanation of what the island is about, and that's where the word Armenian doesn't appear. But when you talk to local people, and you see the difference between official narrative and state and social groups, the locals know what it is. So and they talk amongst themselves that this was an Armenian church, and for them it's also instructive that the state doesn't talk about it. And that's a taboo subject, but they all know it's a taboo. And this is a taboo within which we also engage as a diaspora Armenian organization. We published a book on Akhtamar, which we disseminate. Next one, please. So, now this is an Armenian cross stone. It's a very typical Armenian art form. It's often used for tombstones. There are thousands of them in the world, but very few of them surviving in Turkey. This was dumped in Bitlis, and I've been photographed because it's a particularly good example. This could be 1,000 years old. Next one, please. What is interesting is that this is an Islamic cemetery. The architectural form you see here is actually from the local architecture, which is Armenian. But within Turkish debates, the fact that and they even call it a kumbet in Turkish, kumbet in Armenian. that this is something that they've appropriated, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this is where when I talk about the fluidity about our common culture. So it's very Islamic with Arabic writing, with mosaics, but the form is, the kumbet is very prominent in this area, even within Turkey itself. I only know one outside of eastern Turkey, in Konya. Next one, please. And when you walk inside, these are the stones. It's very similar to the cross stones. In this area, you have this type of Islamic cross stones, which is very similar to the Christian cross stones, because it's not a cross stone. But this is where you see the fluidity, cultural commonality that the Turks, in this case, and Armenians share. This is the 13th, 14th century Seljuk, but nowhere would that be acknowledged or discussed, because they will say this is completely Turkish. The similarities are never part of the official discussions, and this is points on which we challenge the Turkish state narrative. Next one, please. And then cars, further on, very typical, you can see what we call the Armenian kumbet in the top. This is a Holy Apostles Monastery, not monastery, a cathedral in Kars, another former Armenian capital. It's now a mosque, but it's been preserved because it's a mosque. You can see the apostles at the top, but there's no Armenian writing. But there is no explanation that this was Armenian once, although the king's name appears. Okay, next one. So there's an explanation. The Russian had this and so forth. King Bagrat, the Baghrati kings, they built it, 932. But the word Armenian doesn't appear there, because it's a taboo word. It's very strange, but that strangeness is part of the point of discussion with local people. And that tells you a lot about their knowledge of the unofficial knowledge of this area. Next one, please. Nearby is the medieval Armenian city, the Famagusta of ancient Armenians. I say Famagusta because this is on the border of Armenia, and people in Armenia watch this church, this city. It was known as the city with 1,001 churches. Today, if you were to go there, the tourists go there, the word Armenian doesn't appear anywhere on it. The touristic books, the guidebooks, the English guidebooks all talk about this, but not on the Turkish material. Next one, please. Again, this is the explanation where I say the word Armenian doesn't appear, even though they'll talk about the church and so, and the dates are all correct, but it's not an Armenian church. It's a taboo word. Next one, please. And as you walk in the city, it's one of the most remarkable sites in the world. I love to go on a walk with you, TASOULA, one day, because that's how you draw attention to it. There are still amazing Christian churches standing. Of course, the Armenian word doesn't appear, but they are still there. Next one, please. Very beautiful, typical of the area. This is actually a very huge building. You don't have no sense of scale. Next one. Beautiful church. Should we go inside? Next one. Inside the church, very Byzantine-like the iconography. I'm told that it's actually Georgians. It's like a Georgian influence. Again, it shows these. Now we think of Armenian, Greek, whatever, it's separate, but they're not separate. There's a lot of crossover in terms of borrowing, building things together. It's one of the most remarkable icons that I've seen, but because of lighting, you can't see the original. Next one. It's one of the few surviving examples. So that's one. Then we jump to the other side of Aftamar, Diyarbakir. Diyarbakir is a Kurdish city where the locals reject the official narrative and they want to bring back the memory that the state has destroyed. So when you walk down the main street, you can see signs showing where the churches are. Next one, please. This is the Armenian church in Diyarbakir. It was renovated with the help of the local municipality. This is part of the contrition and catharsis that the local Kurds are looking for, and we have a role to play with that. So they renovated this church, they look after this church. Recently, this whole area, but not the church, has been destroyed because of fighting. But if you look at the architecture of this particular place, it's completely different than what we saw before. It is a local architecture that the Armenians share with the local, as I mentioned, Chaldeans, Assyrians. Next one, please. This is another Assyrian church, very different. And next one, please. And this is a mosque, but very, in some ways like the Armenian kumbet. And you realize that Armenians had a local culture of Diyarbakir. They shared in terms of architecture, food, even language. Until Armenian was standardized, the Armenians who spoke their language here was a mixture of Kurdish, Turkish, Arabic, and Armenian. It's modern nationalism, the creation of modern Armenian language, that we sort of rejected that and we said, now we're going to speak clean Armenian. So we're sort of separating ourselves, but in essence there is an integration there which is a shame to lose. Next one, please. Same with music. I like this one because this is a monument that the local Kurds put up. Kurds get a lot of bad press in the world. but they are a leading force within Turkey for democratization. This is a monument they put up there. It's called the Common, it's a monument to common pain, but that's a crude way of translating in many languages, including Assyrian, Armenian, Hebrew, and Kurmanji, and so forth. What's interesting is that this was put there in order to commemorate the pain that they felt. It's against the state again, right? It's memorialization. The Kurds have felt against the Turkish state because of the massacres that they're seeing and so forth. But when this monument was opened, the Kurdish leaders stood up and said, before we ask for forgiveness from the Turkish state, we have to forgive for what we did to Armenians and Assyrians. So already you see that the state cannot control the narrative. There's a lot more going on there. There are still bubbles that are appearing there, and this is where we have a role to play. We as an organization, Armenians, and in the case of the Gomidas Institute, we engage the society and we build on it. We strengthen it. I'll be honest with you, there is no real Greek presence. There's room for Greek presence. There used to be a Greek church in Diyarbakir. Alright, so this is where we can, through peace activism, we can challenge these dominant nationalist and vulgar sense narratives, and we can begin mending the fences. We can building those bridges that states have destroyed, and the memories that are there. Very quickly, next one. Very quickly, this is Kayseri, an Armenian church that's still there because locals are looking after it. If you look at this, Kayseri is a more Hellenic area. The Armenian architecture here reflects that Hellenic culture that Armenians there share. It's still an Armenian church. There's a lot that's Armenian about it, but you can see this could easily be an Orthodox church. Next one, please. A second church. Again, it's not an aberration. Another church in Kayseri. Not typical of what we saw at the beginning, but certainly typical for the area. Something local Armenians shared with local Greeks and possibly local Turks. And at the local level, something that we don't really reflect on because we are supposed to reject everything Turkish. And I think, personally, that is wrong. Next one. And, of course, I don't want to suggest that Armenian monuments are standing. Most Armenian monuments in Turkey are not standing. Most have been destroyed with the neglect or actual involvement of the state. This is another 9th century Armenian monastery near Harper, central Turkey, with a huge monastic complex. Only the church remains. Can we go next one, quickly? It's disgusting, the state it's in, with grave robbers, graffiti. But this is more typical of what's been going on inside Turkey. These places do not merit restoration. The state will not do anything to safeguard it. Even locals who try to safeguard it, they can't. All it takes is a few people, grave robbers, to go and dig at night, and over time, these will all be lost, and the state is quite aware of it. So this is where the state exercises the role of deciding what they're going to preserve, what they're not going to preserve. What is Christian is secondary, and they're quite happy to let it go, or they appropriate as being quote-unquote Turkish, and over time, the whole area is being reformatted as if it was an Islamic state with only Turkish architecture and Turkish past. Next one. I think that's the best. So this gives you an idea that in this case, material culture within Turkey, the way it's being destroyed. Of course, in the Armenians case, it's different than the Cyprus one. In Cyprus, we can still try and regain artifacts and regain buildings. This has been going on for 100 years. But it's still not lost. Certainly, the memory is not lost. And within Turkey, we want Turkey to be democratized, because a democratic Turkey allows us to have a voice and but then the question is, are we taking that burden? In a democratic context, we have the ability to challenge official Turkey through locals, allowing them to play their role in that process, and to show an alternative way of having Kurdish, Armenian, Turkish, Greek relations. So Turkey is not necessarily a lost case, and that's in some ways going backward. Within Turkey there are currents that do oppose the state, but the state is a major source of the problem. The state is the problem, and we need to find ways of challenging them. One of them, the most important one, is the democratic context, the context we have to have in Turkey, so that we can start having a voice within Turkey itself. It's not a lost cause, even though so much has been lost today. And as Cypriots, we want to be Turkey, the democratic state, so that they can be answerable for their actions, and let Turkish civil society also demand that from their own state as well. Many Turks don't want to carry the burden of shame that the Turkish state has put on their backs. Many youngsters, and this is fertile ground on which we can work through peacemongering and building bridges with ordinary people. It's not a lost cause. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was very, very interesting. Thank you, Ara. I find that absolutely fascinating. And when we come to the questions later, I think there'll be a lot of questions about how you deal with denial and the Turkish denial of everything to do with its human rights abuses over the years. Professor?
Yes. I will try to sort of discuss perhaps, I think, going forward, where we go in the future as we see this sort of current crisis in Syria and Iraq, essentially repeating itself history once again, where we saw from Cyprus the case study there, as well as Turkey, really, in many cases with communities. So I'm just going to go quickly go over sort of some events that have happened in recent times and connect it back to where TASOULA sort of started the story earlier this evening. Next slide, please. I guess I'll condense, but never mind. You can see, I think most of you by now know that the sort of news narrative of destruction of sites, and that sort of gets the headlines, where these sort of sacred places, both Islamic but also Christian certainly, have been destroyed. Next one. And the real story, though, behind a lot of this, and this is kind of it's sort of similar to Cyprus. You have the invasion; it's very traumatic. You see it; it's in front of your face. But the real story is the looting that goes behind the scenes, like much quieter kind of destruction. That's exactly what has happened in places like Syria and Iraq. So these are sites, ancient sites in Syria that are well known from classical periods, where they have been extensively looted. You can see these little holes, which are essentially robber holes. That have happened in the last few years. Next slide, please. And the things that come out of these holes are these kinds of artifacts, things like statues. Sometimes they're sort of simple kinds of artifacts like pottery or other kinds of cones that have inscriptions and that can be sold. A lot of these artifacts are quite ancient, more than 5,000 years old. These are more classical periods, something like 2,000 years old. And it's quite extensive in a place like Syria. There was a recent study where they looked at sites that were looted, and this is a map that shows you throughout the country. So it's something that's happening throughout the entire country, essentially ripping communities throughout both Syria and Iraq, and extensively throughout these countries. Next slide. So what's the sort of big issue? What is the sort of message that comes out of this? Is that, well, as we saw with Cyprus, you have this kind of long-term damage that's beginning to happen. It's the kind of damage where the cultural identity of a place begins to be taken out. And similar to what we saw in Turkey, this identity can be redefined. It's exactly what ISIS was trying to do by destroying sites. It was essentially they were trying to redefine that narrative in some way, create their own narrative and erase it. So on the one hand, it's the sort of looting and selling of artifacts that makes money for people, individuals. On the other hand, it's also a way to essentially erase identity, erase culture. So it's difficult to, and for these countries themselves, as we see with Cyprus as well as Turkey, then we have an issue with things like how do we use that culture in the future going forward? In many of these countries, economically, they depend on these kind of cultural places. These sites don't just have cultural meaning and significance, but they have economic value. Countries like Cyprus, certainly, but also Iraq and Syria, heavily dependent on tourism that visited these sites. So there's long-term economic loss. And certainly the cultural loss is the most significant of cultural property. And in the long term, it's the cultural kind of identity that really binds these communities together. So it's a more of a long-term sort of loss. So obviously, the loss of people is the more traumatic, more important kind of loss that happens in an immediate sense. But it's that long-term cultural loss that really tears communities apart and creates a more difficult healing process when communities try to come back together once again. So next slide. And so we see these antiquities today, once again, as we saw with Cyprus, in the markets. Western markets are very prevalent, also in the Near East as well, the Gulf. There are many places buying artifacts, whether it's from Egypt, but also certainly from classical kinds of remains that you also have in places like Syria and Iraq. Those have also been showing up in Western markets everywhere from London, but also going all the way to places like New York and around Europe and even into Japan. Next slide. So what does it all mean? How do we look at all these kinds of sort of recent narratives that we have from Syria and Iraq, the lessons that we're learning, the sort of repetition of history? I mean, in some sense, because we've had these case studies from Cyprus and others, we can begin to perhaps do things a little differently, begin to learn where we can go and make things better. We can begin to sort of take local action by people investing in their heritage to ultimately stop looting. So using locals, people who are most traumatized by these events, to sort of put back the cultural heritage together, so to speak, in these places. We saw from TASOULA's case that basically her experience of having close connection to the artifacts, the iconography in that case, sort of made it more tangible to her. And so I think that would be the case, certainly with refugees and others coming from places like Syria and Iraq, to also engage with these artifacts because it'll be tangible. They'll be aware that it's their heritage that has that kind of cultural and historical significance. And so bringing people to that kind of significance and using them to help stabilize those countries in terms of the cultural loss, I think is a critical step. And so stability and peace will also certainly be an important step. But along with that, and in part together with that, it also takes a kind of organization of those people so we can begin to sort of put that heritage back together as a part of the peace process, essentially. So people begin to see that heritage is common among the different ethnic groups within Syria. So we saw in Turkey, for instance, that Armenians, Kurds, Turks, Greeks all lived together at one point together. And cultural heritage can also help bring people together because the reality is a lot of it is actually quite similar among the different ethnic groups. So you shouldn't let ethnic groups try to use it to erase identity, but rather use it as a way to sort of bring different combinations of people together, essentially. So people who are interested in stopping antiquities being sold in the market, destinations can put pressure on the sort of the global market. So places like in the West where these things are being sold, I think that's where sort of our own actions can become more useful. So whether we are refugees from these countries or we're essentially people like anybody really who is interested in stopping the antiquity thefts, I think can be involved. And we saw how today antiquity thefts don't have just sort of immediate cultural damage, and it's not just something that's sort of intangible, but actually has real tangible effects. So we know antiquities have been actually sold to fund groups like ISIS. So we have to sort of, I think it's really a security issue as well as a kind of cultural heritage issue that we take interest into this. And so that's why I think we need to mobilize in some sense. So organizations like Walk of Truth can be quite useful as a way to not only help cultures, cultural heritage being sort of regained or recaptured from or prevented from being destroyed, essentially. But they can also be useful in sort of preventing theft of cultural items being used to fund groups that are also causing some of the violence. So I think bringing all that together is going to be an important step, and we can begin to mobilize the refugee immigrant communities who are essentially the most involved in some ways. They are most closely identified with these artifacts. And they're also very aware of the kind of looting networks that are going on in these countries. So they'll also have most information potentially. The antiquities market is very active, but it's also a very unknown market. We know things wind up in the West, but we don't know exactly how. If you go to places like southern Turkey, you can see lots of antiquities being sold. But once you leave Turkey, it's impossible to see where these artifacts go. We find very few looted artifacts in the Western communities where we can prove that this came specifically from Syria in the last few years, for instance. So that's very difficult for us to prove. So we have to rely on refugees and immigrants to really help with that. And certainly things like new laws that are coming into shape, like the Cultural Property Act, which TASOULA and others have helped to sort of promulgate in this country, I think will be very important. They're kind of more long-term. Having legislation to sort of prevent and combat antiquity thefts, I think is a longer-term solution, but it's certainly very important. But they're also part of the process. So I think all these things have to come together. It's beginning to reflect those lessons we learned from earlier cases like Cyprus, that it's necessary to have the mobilization of immigrants, the mobilization of people in general, and using our lobbying efforts to create laws and legislation that begins to combat looting, to help not only reunite artifacts with where they belong, essentially, with the people that they belong to, but also beginning to see them as ways to heal communities, ways to heal the economies of these places, but also to prevent things like these terror groups and other groups from utilizing them as means to create violence. So we have to see the importance of them in those areas. So hopefully we can begin to learn those lessons and apply them to Syria and Iraq going forward. And I'm sure there'll be other conflicts we'll have to apply it, unfortunately, to as well. But these lessons can at least allow us to better respond to these events as they develop over time. And so thank you for creating a lesson for us, and I hope that was useful as well.
Very, very
Thank you very much.
We are going to move now into the questions and this discussion. I'm conscious it's very, very hot again this evening, so we are going to try and have this quite a quick process, but we'll stay as long as we need to. Before we do that, though, I know TASOULA wants to say something very quickly.
I want to say that when we talk about advocacy and changing laws, civil society, academics, or activists like myself can do nothing unless they have brave politicians who are sensitive to the subject, and they can campaign or take that subject to the heart and change legislation. So my personal copy I would like to give to such a brave man who is among us today, and that is Dave Burrows, the former MP of Enfield, one of the greatest ambassadors of the CYRUS cause, a man I was introduced to because he went to show the destruction of cultural heritage in the occupied area and ran into a Dutch lady, and via Jason Harlambos, I'm honoured to know you, David. And perhaps what you don't know is that David and I have been working ever since, and he is the catalyst of the foundation of the all-party parliamentary group for the protection of cultural heritage in areas of conflict here in London, together with Lord Renfrew. And since our first exposure in 2013, we had several events, but he is catalytical in sensitivizing the government of the UK to change its laws in relation to protecting cultural heritage. I'll give you the book, and David, perhaps I shouldn't put you on the spot, but I shall send you a formal invitation, and it will be a great honour for me and everybody else in Walk of Truth if you would consider, now that you are not a politician, to join the board of Walk of Truth.
Thank you very much. And just kind of say very briefly, the joys of not being formally, I think one never stops being a politician, frankly. You don't have to be elected to be a politician, but we all are full of our politics, of a life of a community of which Polis is. And very much part of the community in the heart of my concerns for not just the Cypriot community, but actually it goes beyond the Cypriot community. It's a question for humanity. Is the protection of cultural heritage, and that's what books like these do, and the lifetime work really of TASOULA does, which is bring it to bear that it's not just a special interest, it's an issue of concerns for Cypriots, for Armenians, indeed for Chypriot, for Turks, for Brits, for everyone, the protection of cultural heritage, it's the protection of our civilization and all decent values that we care about as we go about our ordinary business in cosmopolitan London. And that's what drove me to it, not least actually the issue not just of Cyprus, but the issue of human rights, and coming on the back of championing the cause and concerns around human trafficking and combating that, and the Modern Slavery Act that came into being through the Prime Minister's good efforts, was the need to match that by showing that we want to be leading by ratifying the Hague Convention and passing the Cultural Property Act. But it's about legislation, but frankly, lawmakers and politicians can only do so much. It is a community humanitarian concern that civil society must mobilise and not tolerate the intolerable, which we see whether it's in Cyprus and Turkey. But for all us, for humanitarian sake, we must all champion this cause. Thank you very much, TASOULA, and I'll be on that cause, and I'll gratefully accept your invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got about 20 questions, but I'm not allowed to ask questions just yet. So I'm going to open the floor up. Look, please ask a question, don't give a speech. Can you keep it short? And we'll get through a lot of questions and hopefully answers if you do that. Otherwise, if people talk and talk and talk, we're all going to sit here getting hot and we won't get too many questions. And I am going to stop people because you know I'm a strict chair. So, who wants to ask a question?
Nobody dares though.
Okay.
What is the biggest barrier to getting speedy government support across the world to conquer this problem? I don't understand the issue.
Okay.
Why are criminals more powerful than governments?
Okay, who wants to answer? Ladies first.
I think that it is a matter of priorities. Looting has been happening for centuries. Legislations are there, but there was not enough understanding about the vast variety of legislation that we have from country to country. Within the European Union, for example, there's no harmonization of the legislation. But there are also different problems, such as how do you tackle this problem? Because you excavate illegally, then you pass it through borders, so you need to have customs officers who can recognize and have access to experts to be able to identify whether something is false or not. Then it comes to the market. You need to have protocol for ethical dealing. And, for example, when it's offered on the market, what should one buy and not buy? You know, the legislations nationally, apart from differing, some of them have statutes of limitations. It is not a criminal offense. But I think now, with what has happened to Syria and Iraq, it has people understood that destroying cultural heritage is not a secondary issue. And the evidence is that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the 10th of July recently invited 15 experts of us worldwide to advise how to come up with a policy so that these war tribunals can bring to justice criminals for cultural cleansing. Because now we have the evidence that traffickers, the act of trafficking, is linked to a chain of other crimes like drugs, whitewashing of black money, weapon selling, and extremism.
Does anyone else want to address that?
Just a quick comment. I mean, from my experience, I worked to advise the government in 2003 in the U.S. when I was there. About the Iraq war that was happening then, and certainly none of it was taken seriously. So it is, like TASOULA said, often perhaps not seen as a high priority among other things. And also just many stakeholders involved in many countries. It's legal to sell antiquities, so there's different interests, and how do you regulate that? There's no easy way to regulate, like you would say, a television or some kind of product. They don't have any kind of identifiable sort of indicator when they came to the country and where they came from. So there's a lot of sort of problems with proof and things like that. So it creates a lot of issues, really.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else with a question? Aligi.
What do you think the mania is to destroy what can't be looted and sold?
Maybe you should answer that, I think that we can all answer
Well, states have an interest. I mean, Turkish ideology, state ideology, denies the existence of these civilizations there, and state authorities themselves have been involved in physically dynamiting some of these sites, and locals will tell you when that was done. There's knowledge of the actual destruction process, even to the point of turning the rubble into gravel for road building. I mean, to that level. There's a beautiful Armenian monastery near Akhtamar, which completely not there after Narek. And I said, well, what happened? 1960s, not even that part. 1960s, it was destroyed, and they turned into gravel to build roads. I think this is almost cultural hatred, and I'm not sure how you get over it. But it's part of the national ethos that the state is trying to instill in people, and that can be done in other ways. But I'm not sure it's the easy way.
But I also think, if I may ask, what we see, for example, happening now in the Middle East, is that when you deliberately destroy these monuments, you actually destroy the reference point of that community. So the memories, the collective memories, so you actually destroy that community, that village, you take the soul of them. So that's one. And second, when you destroy the historical evidence of the previous civilizations living there, you are, as a conqueror, able to rewrite history as you see fit.
Yeah. Especially in the wake of genocide. I mean, you got rid of it, say the Pontic Greeks or whatever. You have to get rid of the evidence that they were there even in the first place. And these states believe they can do that, literally.
I mean, it's just an observation from me. I mean, do you think, panel, that it's possible to reconcile warring factions, or, to use a word I'm not very keen on, reunite a country without an acknowledgement of the wrongs done on cultural destruction and looting and the destruction of the identity of a community? Do you think it's possible to have that settlement or reconciliation or reunification without an acknowledgement and an attempt to restore that trust and faith?
Obviously, I don't think so. It's truth and reconciliation. Otherwise, it's a form of violence. If you don't recognize it, it's constant denial. Because denial has to be reinforced through teaching, through censorship programs, and so forth. I don't think so. No.
But also to allow people who are affected by war to rebuild their future post-war with the ruins of the past. It is a healing process. And when you deny that to them, the inner conflicts linger longer. And therefore, it's very difficult to build peace on injustice or when there is no trust. And I really, really believe that cultural heritage can be a brilliant ambassador for trust, for the foundations for peace.
Mark, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, just from my own experience in Iraq, I mean, I saw how these sites and artifacts are a commonality among different ethnic groups. So pointing and using them in that respect as a way to bridge communities, I think is a very powerful potential. So yeah, that's another reason why you certainly have to fight against their destruction, because it sort of affects the narrative that I think is actually useful in bridging communities once again together.
Okay, back to everyone else.
I would like to ask the leader of which is more specialist on Turkish history, etc. Can be regular, for instance, through United Nations or UNICEF, so they don't change the history. And the actual history and the description of the monuments, for instance, as you mentioned earlier on, that they don't say that there was an Armenian church, for instance, or can be regulated, imposed to these countries not to be able to change the history.
Well, from a strategic perspective, Turkey's denial of, say, not just Armenian, but also Greek history, used to be exported. I mean, literally through academics that they won over, who would write like Stanford Shaw, pro-Turkish state narrative textbooks. That's already been changed. That's already been challenged outside of Turkey. Turkey is much more defensive in that context. Whether you can change inside of Turkey itself with pressure, I'm not sure if you can do that. But the point I was making was that within Turkey, there are ordinary Turks who themselves don't want that to happen. And particularly at the good universities, people who have international reputations, they don't want to be part of this crass denialist historiography that the state is producing. So you have two tiers, academia, tiers in Turkey today. The good universities are not deniers. The good universities are venues where you can discuss these issues. It's these second-rate Anatolian universities are still reproducing and using state channels to propagate their views, to enforce educational curriculum and so forth. So within Turkey there's this challenge. I think that's the way. Allow the Turks themselves to challenge and have the dignity of putting their own records straight. And there is such a process going on. I think if you put pressure outside, they could become much more defensive. It's better to allow Turks themselves to do that. And it was happening until very recently. But in fact, most of those academics today have been fired in the last year or so under Erdogan. And many of them are in exile. Many of them are orphan academics in British, American, German universities, temporarily outside. But this has been part of the rectors of universities. This is where the state is hitting back. Because they are seeing in the modern age, it's not that easy to rewrite history with the internet and with a developing, educated community. Yeah, Turks themselves who don't want to. Why wouldn't I carry the burden and the shame of what my ancestors did, or for that matter, even what my teachers did 20 years ago, teaching this material? So I think this is the way I would see it. The processes are still there. More effective.
I think in a broader context, though, there is a way. And that is by what is happening now in The Hague with the International Criminal Court. Once the international courts bring to justice cultural cleansing, and that is the deliberate change of the names, the deliberate cleansing of the identity of the people, then you can stop it. Now, how do you make it a priority? I think by making policymakers understand the definition of ethnic cleansing is when you push people away of their territory. The cultural cleansing is when you destroy the evidence that they ever lived there. Now, if prosecutors and lawyers can understand that if you can prove ethnic cleansing and deliberate cultural cleansing, you can convert ethnic cleansing to genocide, then it becomes much more priority for brave prosecutors to bring people to justice. And unless they bring them as criminals to international courts for justice, this will continue.
So we're talking about cultural cleansing, and there's a very easy thing that can be fixed in northern Cyprus, where every village and town has had its name changed to a Turkish name. Google have complied with that regime and enabled those changes to be broadcast all over the world, which legitimises it in a way. Surely governments or the UN can put pressure on Google and say, look, this state doesn't exist. Those names are wiping out the cultural identity of those towns and villages. Fix it.
Listen, all of these things are correct, and I'm sure there are attempts from diplomats for Google, but I will not defend what the diplomats ought to do. I will tell you what I would advise the government of Cyprus to do, and we should all be doing. The destruction of cultural heritage must stop to be seen as property, and who holds the ownership of this. As David Barrow spoke, is the human rights that is important. I was recently in the United States, and I was in a gathering of Cypriots of the diaspora, and a person from the State Department was there, and they were discussing the Cyprus issue. So I brought the issue of the destruction of cultural heritage, and I said to him, I, as a Christian Orthodox, am deprived of my right to pray. That is the crime. That is the human right deprivation that I have. And then the gentleman turned around and said to me, I have good news for you. Last year, we have obtained a lot more permits to take liturgy in the churches than every other year. So I turned to him and I said, do you really want me to thank you for that? It's no permits I want to abolish the permits. I want to have the right to go and restore my church, and I want to have the right to go and pray in it. Now, once we start explaining that, then changes will come.
First of all, on behalf of CYRUS Commission, I would like to thank everyone in the panel for a very illuminating presentation on this very important issue, which unfortunately is a sad issue. It's a plague for our contemporary society. But putting both cards as a diplomat and as an academic, I just want to mention that this is not new. It's not inherent to our society or our era. It's been going on and it's inherent. If something is inherent in our DNA, as TASOULA said about our religious cultural heritage, I think it's unfortunately in humanity's DNA to destruct cultural heritage once it's given a chance. And there are numerous previous examples of people destroying other people's cultural, religious, or spiritual, tangible or intangible heritage, Christians included in many cases. Yes. However, we are not in the Middle Ages. I do think that lessons are learned and should be learned, and we should do something about it. So I was very glad to hear about this holistic approach. It's a very complex issue, and sometimes simplicity is a good tool. So if we have a combination of states' policies, international conventions, and I'm very proud of being a Cypriot, and I have Cyprus as a small country, representing ourselves in international level and being the pioneers for a new convention to be signed by 6 countries, hoping to reach out to even more countries for the protection of cultural heritage is a huge thing. However, small countries cannot provide both the great idea and the implementation, because in every implementation project, the what-if factor should be considered. And I wish we had the means to have this aspect of the problem solved as well. We cannot. I mean, if you look at the sizes, the economies, the military power, Cyprus is neglectable. We are, of course, a member of the EU. We have collaborated on an international level. We have proposed legislations. We did a lot of work, but we need support from states that can actually do something if these conventions are not followed first and foremost from those who sign it, but also other states as well, Turkey included. And as a historian, I mean, history, we cannot actually discuss about objectivity. We can ask about the quality of our primary sources. History, since the Annals School, I think it's been accepted as subjective because it's a matter of interpretation. However, what is going on here is a manipulation of primary sources, and that's much worse than manipulating history itself, because you put the basis on, you put a wrong basis on whatever word will come next from academics, scholars, and so forth. If you cannot connect to the history, to the people who lived in a specific time and era in a specific place, how can then build a narrative on false evidence? So that I think should be the message, which is more of an ethical one rather than a religious one. A person might not be so religious, might not connect to the icon so much, but I don't think any person with the ethics of Western civilization will ever accept the destruction of those images or any archaeological artifacts as something that is good to be happening or is it okay to be happening. It's not. And that should be the message forward. And I think this is not even the case of people of a certain culture or religion that usually do these terrible acts, Islamic State included. And I was reading a book recently from a Muslim scholar entitled Refuting ISIS, stating very clearly and in a very, let's say, theological way how this Islamic State is neither Islamic nor a state. And there are examples from the Quran which are clearly a call for tolerance, respect, not to destroy, not to enslave, not to rape, not to have people murdered. All this, there is a counter narrative on what Islam is. And I believe it's a very good case if we can promote this message, both Muslims and non-Muslims, that this is pan-human values that should be adapted. And that's also something common we share. And I often hear the message that a lot of people or political parties put something first, either Britain, US, Cyprus, whatever. Well, I think if you have to put something first, put education. Because it's education that will deconstruct the market of holy icons, of cultural heritage. Is the new generation that if we build up strong characters and ethical people, will actually make this market collapse. If there is no market, nobody will trade antiquities, nobody will be looting cultural heritage. And I would like your reflections on this. Thank you.
And lots of issues there.
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
Yes, yes. But I would like to go on the last one, education and history. If one is a correct human being, respects the perspective of the other. If one is a correct human being, respects the cultural, so the historical perspective of the other or the religious symbols of the other. And rather than trying to compromise on history and try to agree what to say and what not to say to the youngsters, perhaps it's time that history books ought to have more than one perspective. That is what I would like to see in progressive policy makers in the European level. I find it ridiculous to sit down in a conflict situation and discuss about the books at high school and say, oh, we mustn't say this happened, we mustn't say that happened because we provoke the other. No. The young people today learn different than us. They have vast majority of information on internet and many sources, and they are trained to create their own opinion. We should capitalize on that, and we should give history books with more than one perspective.
Well, just to add that, I think that's already certainly is the case, that we have lots of perspectives that the young people are certainly aware. But I still think there's a value to giving the kind of neutral voice history that we need to sort of promulgate in academia, but also certainly in the narratives that we see in our country or other places. So hopefully that there can be some story that we can all sort of agree on. So I think that is still an important part of what we do, is making sure that the accurate story is given in addition to providing our own narrative while it's potentially being subjugated by state authorities or whatever it might be.
Related point, something gentleman earlier said about Google Maps. One important reference, it may sound crass, but is Wikipedia. A lot of kids use it, and we have a lot of discussions there. And on the Armenian issue, the information that's put there, which the Turkish state cannot manipulate, is consulted by millions of people, including Turks. Many of the lectures are put online. You'll be surprised how many, but a third of all lectures that we give now are recorded, say, in SOAS, as a series on Armenian history. A third of the people who watch are inside of Turkey. And you realize that the Turkish state is losing control. They need to change their position, but that is the popular media and the nature of the contestation is changing. And those are opportunities for us. Whether it continues this or that direction would also depend on what role we play in engaging that. We can open information on Wikipedia. If you really wanted to, you can. And you can contest what's written there. And even in contestation, already you're raising an issue that the other side doesn't even want to be discussed. I don't want to be seen as a defender of Wikipedia. I know how much academics cringe at the idea, but it is consultative, and it does have an effect, just like Google Maps.
I've got a question for you, TASOULA. You mentioned earlier culture crime watchers, and I just wondered what role you think ordinary people in society have and what they can do to actually assist in this. We've heard about the role of the state, we've heard about the role of academics, we've heard the role of diplomats. What role, and politicians, what role do you think ordinary members of the public, people in this room, can play?
I think watching the trade, because if you stop the demand, you stop the supply. So watching the trade and reporting anonymously to organizations like ourselves about something which is on sale, which seems to be from conflict or war zones, we will certainly mobilize our experts and lawyers to try and bring that antiquity back. We need volunteers to write, we need bloggers, and each and every one of you can act as eyes and ears for reporting illicit excavations, because it's not just the Cypriots, but in Cyprus this also happens, or you know of information that can lead to us combating art trafficking. You're most welcome to reach out to info@walkoftruth.org and we will give you a job.
There you go. You've got a job offer.
Yeah.
Having heard everything that has been said, I would like to ask you, isn't it that we do have treaties that forbid demographic change, ethnic cleansing, settlers and everything? If you go back to post-war, Second World War, Geneva Conventions of 1949, everything is stated in there very clearly. The only thing that is missing is the commitment from organizations like European Union, the United Nations, the big powers, Britain, America, and all these big countries who have a big say, and they finance them, to put a stop to it, to implement what has been decided in Geneva in 1949. So as far as legislation is concerned, I think there is enough, but the will is not there, and the power to impose and implement those decided in 1949.
Okay, people are beginning to get very hot, I think, and start suffering. I don't want to prolong this longer than we need to, but is there anyone who wants to ask a last question? Or shall we start looking at wrapping this up and thanking everyone? Okay, there's one last question.
TASOULA for next year, August 14.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Marina. She reminded me, because actually she gave me a card today, which I'm going to read to you. And then I thought, oh, yes, I forgot to, I realize now. Dear TASOULA, on behalf of 10 million Armenians, I shall join you for the march on the 14th of August, 2018. I want to go home. On this poster, this is me as a child, during the only picture I have as a child. And here is myself in 2013 that I went to see my city. What you don't see is 5 Turkish soldiers threatening to shoot me, and my father, who died 40 days ago and was buried as a refugee, calling me to come back. So, still a refugee, and down here I'm saying, I'm coming home, I'm coming back home, Mr. Erdogan. 14th of August, next year, we are going to mobilize a peaceful walk. We are trying to bring people of the diaspora, but also wonderful people from human rights and culture worldwide. We already have some cultural personalities from the Netherlands and from America. And I would like any one of you who is interested to join us to send an email on info@walkoftruth.org, and we'll let you know more.
And thank you. And Lobby for Cyprus will promote that for you as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it leaves me just to thank the other panellists before I invite Theo just to close this seminar. But I just wanted to say thank you very much to, I think, 3 absolutely superb speakers this evening. I've done a lot of these over the years at Lobby. I think this is probably the best panel we've ever had, actually. So Mark, thank you. Ara, thank you. James Bond, thank you very much. Theo, over to you.
I don't want to add anything more than you said tonight. TASOULA, if it wasn't for you, about 3 months ago when we had a call together, we wouldn't be here tonight. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I think this is one of the best seminars we've had at Lobby for Cyprus.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All I just would like to do is call Nikos Savidis, please, so we could just have the national anthem, please. Could you all be upstanding, please?
Σε γνωρίζω από την κόψη του σπαθιού την τρομερή. Σε γνωρίζω από την όψη που με διαμετράει τη γη. Απ' τα κόκκαλα βγαλμένη των Ελλήνων τα ιερά και σαν πρώτα αγριωμένη χαίρο χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν πρώτα αγριωμένη χαίρο χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν πρώτα αγριωμένη χαίρο χαίρε ελευθεριά.
Thank you, everyone. Please stay behind the choir book.